You're listening to the Decidedly podcast with Sanger Smith and Sean Smith. Our mission is to help business owners like you defeat bad decision-making so you can improve your health, wealth, and relationships. We do this by digging deep into the stories and expertise of our guests and distilling their knowledge into actionable wisdom for you to carry into your life and business. If you're new to the show, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. If you prefer to watch this week's episode, head on over to YouTube for the full video. Now, let's get into this week's episode and defeat bad decision-making in your life and business.
I do a lot of things that I get mocked for, but one of them that I do the most is walk around barefoot or wear sandals most places. And to be fair, sometimes I do deserve that. I wear sandals to places that might not be appropriate to wear sandals, but I do it because it is so easy in our modern world when we wear these big casts on our foot and these shoes, tighten them up real tight and go walk on concrete all day long to disconnect ourselves from the earth that we live on. And it is proven that if you put your bare feet on the ground for just a few minutes a day, you'll reduce inflammation, your cortisol levels lower, your anxiety dissipates. It's so easy. Doesn't take a lot of effort. I don't even have to sweat to get the benefit. I'll just stand in the grass in my backyard. Not difficult. And I've been doing it for a few years now. And I think out of all of the things that I do to try to help my anxiety, and as I said that was the loudest thunder. I don't know if that's going to come on in the recording, but that was the loudest thunder boom I've heard in my whole life. And it didn't even affect me. It didn't raise my heart rate once. It kind of did actually, but I thought a bomb went off. I guess what I'm saying is just try it for like a few days, maybe 1 week. Stand in your backyard, no shoes on, for a little bit, and just see how you feel. If you're not willing to do that, okay, you still want to reduce your anxiety, listen to the rest of this episode. We've got Steve Cuss on the show. Steve is a pastor who helps people improve their most important relationships with themselves, their employees, and with God, ultimately. He has tangible tools for engaging with God in a deeper, more soul-satisfying way. His goal is to unveil harmful expectations and patterns that keep us spiritually stuck so that we can replace them with practices that offer a more vibrant life. So we talked a lot about anxiety. Anxiety as leaders, how it manifests in ways that we don't expect. Anxiety in our employees, recognizing it and how to deal with it so that we can create a high-performing, loyal team. And we talked a lot about our relationship with God and how anxiety plays a role in conquering that anxiety is a vital part of that relationship. So I think you're going to learn a lot, whether you want to do my barefoot stress relieving strategy or not. Listen to this podcast and you'll get maybe more benefit. I'm Sanger Smith. This is Decidedly. Steve, I was feeling a little bit of anxiety today, and then I hear your voice, and I'm all good.
Oh, good. I'm glad I can assist.
So we're already starting off strong. You have a lot of wisdom that I want to get into. But I'm interested in your story too. Before you became a pastor, you were a chaplain. It sounds like you've kind of always had this calling, but when did it start for you?
The pastor calling or the chaplain calling?
The chaplain calling. I guess it's kind of like an evolution of sorts.
Oh my goodness. I became a hospital chaplain for the most pragmatic of reasons. I was engaged to who is now my wife, and she had one more year of college. She was on a 5-year degree in education. So we had a gap year, and I just wanted to do something in ministry instead of working at Taco Bell, like literally. And that's how I became, I'm not proud of this, but that's how I became a chaplain. I back in the days of the Yellow Pages, kids, you can ask your parents later what that was, but I just opened a Yellow Pages, this is in the 1990s, to an employment agency. And I cold called these employment agencies and I said, I need a job for a year to provide for my new wife. And we kicked around a lot of things. And they said, well, why don't you try chaplaincy? And it just so happened that University of Tennessee Hospital was hiring. I didn't know anything about it. I never saw myself as a chaplain. And it became the most transformative, visceral thing I've ever done in my life. It was amazing. But anyway, I laughed when you said, oh, that was probably your calling. Man, I think God knew I needed it, but I fell into it purely by accident. I think they paid me $16,000 that year, and I worked about 80 hours a week, and I just thought that was a great deal.
It's funny how God has that way of kind of shoving us into the direction we need to go in, and we don't really see it until later. What was your, I don't blame you for taking a utilitarian approach to finding a job. I think a lot of us have done that. It's in some way. What was your relationship with God like at that point? Did you grow up in the church? Or were you just really truly looking for a paycheck?
I was an unchurched kid. I grew up in an agnostic family that God wasn't talked about, mentioned, thought about. And then I became a Christian as a teenager. My older sister had come to Christ a couple of years before through a friend in high school. There was this really vibrant youth group in this church in our town, and all of these unchurched kids start coming. There are 30 kids. Most of us were unchurched. So yeah, I came from a completely secular background. Jesus completely changed my life. Just the encounter with unconditional love was unbelievable for me, even as a teenager. And so I felt a strong vocational call to ministry. I wanted to share my faith with everybody. So I went to Bible college, and Bible college for me was an amazing experience. I loved everything about it. Loved the community, loved the required chapels, loved that, and loved studying the Bible and theology. So I went into chaplaincy with an absolute passion for local church work. Either youth ministry or preaching is what I thought my calling would be. And I think chaplaincy for me, so yes, I went into it for money, but it didn't take long. Well, when I say money, I went into to survive financially.
It was more than zero. It was more than working for free.
More than zero. It was less than minimum wage. So just for people who aren't familiar, medical students do a medical residency and they get paid dirt and they work long hours in exchange for a great education. Chaplains do the same thing. People don't realize this, but ministry students become chaplain residents. You get paid dirt, you work long hours, you come away with a life-changing education. So that was the deal. It was essentially an internship. But it wasn't boot camp. It was like special forces training for ministry. There's nothing like death day in and day out, cancer, burn victims. Like there's nothing like dozens of times a day being with people in the worst moments of life that will forge you as a person and as a pastor. And so I went into chaplaincy with what I would describe as a youth group faith and a Bible college faith. I say that I reflect very positively on both of them, but an untested faith. It hadn't been tested by the storms of life, and chaplaincy, what would you say, beat the living HE double hockey sticks out of it.
I can imagine that was a really tough test. I mean, you're seeing the worst of what the world has to offer. And not only is your faith being tested, but people are looking to you to uphold their own faith.
Yeah. And, Jesus talks about building your house on the rock instead of on the sand. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he gives that little advice. And, I read that and I think to myself, well, no one is intentionally building their house on the sand. Like, I don't know anyone that intentionally builds their house on a bad foundation. What happens is we think we're building on a good foundation until the storm comes. And, my faith was on a good foundation, but there's nothing like death to make you really reflect on, is what I'm standing on real? Is it true? And the question isn't so much, is God true? The question is more, is what I believe about God true? Most people page a chaplain to their room because they're begging the chaplain to beg God for a miracle. And it's difficult if you're like me and if you're a people pleaser, to beg God for miracles and let people down. And so I had a lot of internal work, and that's a lot of my work now, is helping leaders figure out how to be well internally so they can help other people.
What is it about what you believed about God that changed during that experience?
The thing that changed the most, and this was really surprising, was that in order to connect to people in the worst moments of their life, I had to be connected to myself. That was the most surprising thing. And that I didn't realize that I was walking into every room, bringing assumptions and anxiety into the room with me. So this is what a lot of, most of my work now is with leaders. And this is what I'm trying to help leaders realize is if you're not aware of what's going on in you, you're going to infect every room you walk into. And if you're anxious and you don't even know it, which most leaders don't know that they're anxious, you're going to infect your people. So my faith, it was kind of indirect. What surprised me the most was to recognize that I had fears, assumptions. So for me, as it relates to chaplaincy, I have this chronic ongoing belief that I'm supposed to make everyone feel better. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical, but that's my default posture in life. Well, you take a guy that believes that and lives out of that reality, and you put him in an environment where people are screaming and desperate. And I'm going to say things and do things that don't help at all to help me, not them. I don't even realize that I'm saying things for my sake, not their sake. So the big experience of chaplaincy was learning to take my own pulse before helping them, putting the oxygen mask on my own face before helping them. And that was really hard to do. That was counterintuitive. That's what I encourage all leaders to do now. The best thing you have to offer your people is a well self. That's actually what they want from you the most, is if you could just be well, managing your anxiety, creating a place where they can be themselves. That was the biggest surprise for sure.
Yeah, nobody wants to look to a leader and see them biting their nails, sweating profusely, and freaking out a little bit.
Or oftentimes a leader doesn't realize their anxiety shows up as anger or having to have the last word or having to be right. So it's not always fretting. Sometimes the problem with a classic leader is sometimes our anxiety feels powerful to us, so we don't recognize it as anxiety. People sure do. They go away feeling pretty rough. We go away saying that was great leadership when really you were just being, what's the church word for it? An ass, So learning how to manage yourself, how to listen and connect to people rather than running over them, interrupting them, having to have the last word, having to be right. One of the quickest ways you can discover my anxiety is just misunderstand me. I have a false need to be understood. And so I'll just use more words, kind of wear you down, that kind of stuff.
So what you're saying is anxiety doesn't always show up in the caricature that I outlined, where people are nervous and hurrying their speech and stuttering, and it can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. What was happening when you recognized in your chaplain role that you were carrying your own anxiety in that position of leadership?
It was the first time in my life I would even describe myself as an anxious person. It was.
Wow.
It was so disorienting. My life, when I was a kid, I was extremely insecure. I felt very weak. I was quite afraid. I was afraid at home. I was afraid at school. I got bullied a lot. What I didn't realize is in my late teens, I swung the pendulum wildly from fear and insecurity to wild overconfidence, just massive arrogance and overconfidence. I wouldn't have been able to say at the time that was just a form of self-protection. But by the time I got to chaplaincy, I'd been living in that wild arrogance and overconfidence for a solid 6 years. And so chaplaincy reintroduced me to my fear. And that was very disorienting for me. I just thought that I was a Christian leader that thought about Jesus all the time. And so I'd forgotten how to be a human. I thought I was something else, which is called a pastor, like a different species, And chaplaincy wonderfully introduced me to being a human again. And that means that I get to be afraid, and I get to not know what to do, and get to be overwhelmed and tired of death and all the things that a human gets to be. So it really was in some ways a salvation experience for me. And I know a lot of the work you guys do is with business leaders, small business leaders. There's so much in common between leading a church and leading a business. And one of the things we have in common is when you have power and you have a team and employees, you just don't realize how much your anxiety infects your team tenfold because you are a person of power in the room. So, yeah, chaplaincy introduced me to my anxiety. I was really put off by it for about 6 weeks. And then for the rest of the year, I discovered what a gift it was to learn about it and notice it. And then, of course, I was trained in a way of noticing it in others and how do I help de-escalate other people, all of that.
When you do notice it in others, that seems a little bit easier than noticing it in ourselves, but maybe not, because we're not feeling necessarily what someone else is feeling. So how do you notice it in others? Because as a leader, I don't want to show up anxious, but I also don't want to allow someone to be anxious without addressing that in a positive way.
You can usually feel it in the room when somebody's anxiety is spilling over and other people are catching it. So if you look at what you're looking for is, what does somebody believe they must have for them to be okay? And it pops up in so many wild ways. Like it pops up in having to have the last word. So you might have a team member that everyone's kind of landed, but then they have the final say, and even though they don't have the hierarchical position to make the final call, they make the final call. Then there's others where you can notice when somebody infects the room by walking into it.
Yeah.
Everyone's having fun, and then Peter walks in, and the unspoken agreement is we're not allowed to have fun because Peter's not having fun. So Peter this morning packed his lunch, but he also packed his bad day, and he brings both into work.
Yeah.
So what you're looking for as a leader is infection. And then if you want to get deeper, what you'll start to notice is every team forms predictable patterns over time. We all fall into roles. So it's more likely that Peter almost always brings his bad day into work and almost always infects the group. So you start as a leader, if you can stop focusing just on the agenda or the work at hand and start focusing on the way everyone relates to each other, it's fascinating, and it's a superpower in leadership. So you start noticing in patterns, like let's take a staff meeting. You start seeing, okay, that's interesting. Jim always uses the most words in every meeting. Sally never speaks up unless she's spoken to. Every meeting, it's the same. Those three people, they don't really talk in the meeting. They had their own secret meeting after the meeting. And you can almost map out your people like a chess game. And now the next time that person acts that way, you shouldn't be surprised because it's predictable. So it's almost always the same people that are late to any meeting, but they always act like they're surprised they're late. Maybe you've met someone like this.
Maybe I've been someone like that.
Yeah, they walk in and they're like, oh man, I'm late. Like no one else is surprised because they're always late. But they act surprised every time. That's predictable. And so as a leader, if you can start mapping out these predictable patterns, now you have a real power of how do we build cultural health by having these conversations with each other in non-threatening, non-accusatory ways, curious ways. You can break some stuck patterns really quickly when you do that.
So once you recognize the patterns, what's the next step?
Well, the next step is to notice your attempted solution to the pattern. So the tendency in a leader is to always focus on others. Why is Peter always late? Why is this person always infecting the room? I can't believe it. But instead, if you say to yourself, well, what am I doing that's not helping? Like, what attempted solution am I doing that's keeping the problem the same? So, for example, if Peter walks in and he's kind of like an Eeyore, He's kind of just, I don't know, do you remember the old Peanuts comic strip where, who was it that, Pigpen, he had all this dust that went with him. And so somebody like a Peter who walks into the room and they're kind of depressed, their depression kind of infects everybody and the room gets quieter. Okay, so the temptation is to focus on that guy and say, man, why can't he get it together? But where the real power comes is noticing yourself and saying, well, I wonder what I'm doing that's keeping the problem the same or making it worse. And most leaders, they don't know what to do when somebody walks in like that, and so they do nothing. That's what's known in my field as an attempted solution. Whereas if you learn how to contain that person's bad mood rather than infecting it, now you're ready. So really the first step is paying attention to what you do that keeps the problem the same. The simplest way to notice it if you're a parent is the pattern every morning when you're getting your kids out for school in the morning. If you have trouble getting your kids to be ready for school on time, you can be frustrated at your kids, but pay attention to what you're doing as a parent that's keeping that pattern alive. That's your next step. And then once you've gotten that clear, now you're ready to have a difficult conversation with somebody, but you're doing it from a posture of repentance, not rebuke. And that changes everything. So if Peter's coming in with his bad mood and is infecting the bad mood and it's been going on for months, when I sit down with Peter, I'm not saying, dude, I wish you could get it together. Here's what I'm saying is, hey, I don't know if you've noticed, but you often come in and you're carrying a lot and you kind of spill it on us. And hey, man, honestly, that's fine. But the problem is that I don't know what to do to help you and help the people. And so I've been just kind of ignoring it, but it's getting to a point where everyone's affected. So I was wondering if you and I could talk about what we could do to change this dynamic. That's a whole different conversation than you really need to get your crap together.
Yeah.
Because I'm confessing to Peter, I'm saying, look, I'm part of the problem here. So I've had this conversation, like, I had to sit down with a person on my staff who was posting really inflammatory things on social media. And I let him get away with it for weeks. So when I finally, because I'm a conflict avoider. So when I finally sat down with him, I said, look, there's two problems. The first problem is the crazy nonsense that you post on social media. I can't believe you do it. The second problem is that I've let you get away with it for weeks because I'm afraid. I don't like conflict. I didn't want to sit down with you. I don't like to have to direct my people. So I'm really sorry that I've let it go this long. I've let it go way too long. And if you're starting to feel really constrained by me and like this is whiplash, I'm sorry. It is whiplash and that's my fault. I should have talked to you about this weeks ago. Well, it's difficult for someone to get defensive when I'm confessing. This isn't a manipulation tool. This is a genuine way to help build health. So that would be kind of a three-step process is you notice the pattern, you notice your complicity, and then when it is time to talk to the person, you are confessing as much as challenging people.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. If I hit somebody with all of the things that they've done wrong, of course they're going to be defensive. If I can say, hey, we're in the same boat, we've both done something wrong here, let's work on it together, then it's a collaborative team effort, not a punitive conversation that we're having.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then, it goes from there. So a couple of things that are helpful to know is you only ever have these conversations once the anxiety's gone back down. So you never have it in the moment. That'll make it 10 times worse. And then you can start to have these conversations as a team. And again, if they're non-threatening, they go really, really well. You can say, do you think in the meeting that you use a lot of words or not many words? You can just have these kind of gentle, it's helping everyone become self-aware about what they do and then helping everyone take responsibility for their own behavior. And if you create a culture like that, you have to do very little correcting.
Yeah, not doing it in the moment's huge. Hearing you say that reminded me when I was younger, I had an anger problem when I was a kid. And the worst thing that anybody could ever do is say, calm down.
Right. Right.
Well, and then it was, now I'm yelling at you about how I'm not angry. I'm not angry. Shut up. Yeah. Well, okay. I'm so angry that I can't even recognize my anger is present in my denial. And that's not, it wasn't me being, and so many people deal with this, but it's not like I'm being obtuse in that moment. It's not like I'm trying to be combative. Like, I genuinely thought I wasn't angry. and this command to calm down, I was put in a defensive mode so instantaneously that I couldn't even recognize the anger that was called out, nor the anger that was now in the present moment of me rebuking that charge. And so working on it afterwards, yeah, I mean, thankfully, I think I conquered that a long time ago. But if somebody had sat down with me when I was a kid and talked to me about it in the way that you're presenting it and saying, hey, like, I've let you do this. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help you. Let's work on it together. I would have totally been receptive to that. Instead, it was a lot of, you're angry, you need to stop being angry. And also, you need to adopt the solution that I'm going to give you. And a lot of times it's like the solution that we give is, I don't know how to help Peter who's having a bad day every day because I don't have a bad day every day. So if I sit there and I think that I know what Peter needs to do, well, Peter, why don't you just do daily affirmations and like say things you're thankful for? I mean, I do that. Well, yeah, I do that, but I also I didn't start doing that to conquer my bad day. When a lot of times people would say, well, you need to go scream into a pillow. Like, you need to count to 10, do breathing exercises. Like, you've never had an anger problem. Is that pillow there's no pillow here. The pillow's not helping.
Yeah. If we take that case and just sit with it for a while, whether you're a kid or an adult, anxiety is one of those really weird things that often you have it or it has you and you don't even know it. So when you said, I didn't even know I was angry, that sounds really weird to people on the other end of your anger, but that makes perfect sense. That's what anxiety, so anger is just a subset of anxiety. It's just more was going on than your body can contain. And so you had this outburst. Then when somebody says, calm down, well, now you're exposed. Every time you're exposed, shame shows up.
Yeah.
So now you're clinically flooded. You're actually almost incapable in that moment of getting back into your logical brain. You're back in your lizard brain. So the best thing to do is let somebody have room to be, flooded. And then, a couple of days later, like if I was your dad or if you were on my sporting team, I'd say, hey, Sanger, let's talk about it. Remember a couple of days ago when you were angry and I made the mistake of telling you to calm down? Man, I'm so sorry I did that. I know that didn't help. What happened there, Sanger, is I caught your anxiety. That's my bad. Because anxiety is always contagious. So, hey, man, I'm sorry that I gave you such a terrible advice. I know it made it worse. But can we revisit what was going on in you? What was it like for you that got you to that point? And so you use curiosity. Once a kid is about 10, they're able to talk about it. And if they're just thinking about the way they think, you will get angry as a kid again and again and again, but over time, you'll manage your anger. So These are the kinds of conversations we always have with our team, are these kind of debriefs. And it's not a mulligan, it's not a do-over. It's just like, what was going on? What had you triggered? What assumptions did you have? And it's a really powerful tool.
Yeah, and if that emotion has calmed down, we're not in the heat of it, there's a hope that we can talk about it. It's a lot easier to talk about it. I love hearing this approach that you're articulating because it sounds very empathetic, and it's because it is. And it stands in contrast to what I think our culture pushes a lot, which is maybe too much empathy, or at least empathy, something labeled as empathy that isn't really empathy. And it's like, if Peter's having a bad day, we just need to, we need to understand that he's having a bad day, and we just need to tolerate that and let that happen. Oh, well, he's angry. Well, that's because he's maybe dealing with something that we don't understand. And it's like way too tolerant. So
Yeah. It's actually, we call it tolerance, but it's actually being a chicken.
yeah, it's permissive might be a better word.
Yeah.
We're allowing behavior that is not helpful, and we've allowed it in so much for so long that we now have to convince ourselves that behavior is actually good. We've gone past the point of tolerating it. We're now celebrating it. Where is the line where it becomes, maybe too soft?
Say more about that.
So when I think about people who allow leaders that I know that allow a culture that they don't want, some of it's because they're conflict avoidant and they could overcome it through, the examples that you shared. You had that same conflict avoidancy. Other people, they seem to actually in their own head justify this negative behavior. And they said, well, we got to cater to this other person. Instead of work with them empathetically to solve the problem. It's like, let's try to convince them and everyone else that this actually isn't even a bad thing.
Yeah.
And we've got to now adjust. And to me, it seems too soft. I don't know if soft is the right word. But too permissive.
Yeah. I am trying to, if I'm building a healthy team culture, to me, the foundation of it is that everyone's managing their own anxiety. So oftentimes when I'm brought in to consult, what we're looking at is 3 questions, and they're really simple. Number 1, who's generating most of the anxiety? And when we ask that, we're not blaming and scapegoating. We're just clarifying who, because in most teams, the minority of the people are generating the majority of the anxiety. So who's generating it? Second question is, who's carrying it? So in this fictional case with Peter, Peter generates most of the anxiety by bringing his bad day with him, but he's not carrying it. He's the one dumping it. He's spreading it. We're all carrying it. Okay, got it. Now the third question, and this is where the rubber meets the road. What micro adjustments are we all making to keep this first 2 stable, keep it the same? That what I call an attempted solution. We all make these micro adjustments, and you just laid it out beautifully, saying like, oh, well, that's just Peter, that's the way he is. The things we say to justify rather than having a difficult and kind conversation. So for me, the too soft is when people are expected to carry each other's bad behavior instead of take responsibility for their own. That can be as simple as somebody chronically always being late to meetings, and as soon as they walk in, they act like they're not late at all. Or sometimes what they do is they're so self-conscious that they're late that when they walk into the meeting, they're oblivious to what's going on in the meeting and they change the mood. Sorry, maybe the meeting was really getting like something quite vulnerable, but they kind of stomp into it. Oh, sorry, traffic was terrible. I can't believe they bluster their way in. But again, there's no moral value put to this. There's no blame, but it's like, okay, well, you're generating the anxiety. We're all carrying it. How can we put the anxiety back where it belongs on the person generating it? That almost always involves these empathic and frank and curious conversations. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but for me, the line is relational health. If you generate it and expect me to carry it, and you act like you didn't do it, that's going to make me. that's how I go crazy.
That's the perfect way to sum it up. Yeah, when somebody is generating anxiety, asking someone else to carry it, and then acting like they didn't do it, and I think that's exactly what I was trying to articulate. Is sometimes as leaders, maybe it is from a good place in an effort to be empathetic. Yeah. We kind of expect the rest of our team to carry the burden that's being created by someone else on our team. And I think if it was explained that way, most people who are doing that, who are burdening others, would not want to do that. I think there are don't get me wrong, there's some people that do. There's some people that want to say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I got, you're going to have to deal with it. And I think that's right. A defense mechanism in its own way.
it's a immaturity. I work with people like this all the time, particularly founders. They did whatever it took to get to where the company is now. And they paid more than anyone else's pay. They worked, like typically your average founder, they sweat, they did it all. But they get to a point where they're exhausted from it. And what they do is they can't fathom growing. So they say, well, you deal with it. This is just the way it is. This is how these things you're complaining about, this is how we got here. You should all be grateful. They're very combative. I'm just trying to tell them, look, your team's tired. The reason I'm here is your team's tired of dealing with it. They want you to deal with it.
Yeah.
You please deal with it. They've been dealing with it for 15 years. I work with that a lot. And so that's why, I say that self-awareness is radically overrated. It's a great first step. But we've all met self-aware jerks who don't care. This is just the way I am. You deal with it. Well, they're self-aware, but they have no empathy, no concern. I find it much more helpful to sit around a room and say to the staff, how do we all want to treat each other? What are not our company values? What are our staff behavioral values? How are we going to treat each other? And then what are we going to do when we fall short of those values? How are we going to repair? So in my staff, we had a couple of simple guidelines and we all came up with them together. We speak to each other before we speak about each other as much as it is possible. The way we speak to each other is congruent with the way we speak about each other. I remember Chuck Colson used to work for Richard Nixon in the White House. And he was like a special advisor. So he had a West Wing office. And Colson, when he writes about working for the president, he said, man, all these people would come into my office, Colson's office, and say, I'm going to meet with the president today, and when I get in that Oval Office, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. I'm going to tell him what for and how things need to change. And then Colson said, inevitably, you'd watch that same person standing in front of the Resolute desk, hat in hand, Mr. President, it's the honor of my life to be with you, totally different. And I think too many times we vent to our friends and then we're too polite and flattering to the people we have an issue with. I told my team, I'm like, I would rather get your heat. If you're venting about me to your friends, give me the gift of venting at me.
Yeah.
Don't be all kowtowing and all, Steve, you must have such a difficult job. No, just give me your anger, man. Like, have enough respect that I can handle it. Much cleaner. So a CEO who's doing that, a founder that's doing that, if they would have the courage to say, what's it like to experience me when I'm at my worst?
Which is, it does take courage because that's a terrifying
very
thought.
Courageous. But do you want to keep, like, staff turnover is expensive. So even if no other reason than for fiscal responsibility, be well. Like, it's cheaper for your company for you to be well than for you to be anxious.
Yeah, and if you genuinely can't think of anything, oh no, these people should be thrilled and so lucky to be able to work for me. I'm the best boss of all time. Yeah, that's a really good indicator that you're really bad. you really need some help if you think that you have no problems.
The Bible has a category for you. It's called being lost.
Yes.
You are lost. Yeah.
You've said before that anxiety has a gospel message and it's always bad. Well,
yeah.
I know anxiety doesn't come from God. What is that bad news?
Hey, there's all kinds of anxieties. I want to be careful here, but the leadership anxiety I'm talking about, it's selling you a gospel of self. And it's either saying that you should move into self-pity or self-protection, that's one extreme, or like self-aggrandizement, that's the other extreme. And so we see it in the expression, nobody knows what it's like to be me. That can be taken as, I have to be the smartest guy in every room. Thank God I'm here otherwise. Or you have no idea how hard my life is. I've seen both, by the way, in like CEOs. Sometimes when the team says, hey, we want you to deal with it, they're like, well, no one knows how hard my life is. Self-pity. But in self, the gospel of Jesus is lost. We're now operating out of self-protection. And that's where anxiety, it puts us on a treadmill, but we're not going anywhere. So the classic message of anxiety is you can worry your way to peace.
Yeah.
But never done it yet. I've never successfully worried my way to peace. Worry is like drinking salt water. I just worry more. But every time I'm anxious, I'm believing that anxiety has me on a path to freedom, and it never does. So learning to notice the path that anxiety has you on, and then learning to notice that the promise that's dangling in front of you is false, you never get it, that kind of gives you a lower tolerance for it.
Yeah, and focusing on the self is only going to create more anxiety. Like in a social setting, that's essentially all social anxiety is I'm worried about, oh, how do I look? How's my hair? Am I talking too loud? Am I taking up too much space? Does this person like me? Are they going to think this joke is funny? Oh no, they didn't think that joke was funny. It's all about me and myself. If I'm genuinely focused on the person in front of me, I can't be anxious. I'm genuinely listening to the story, genuinely thinking, are they comfortable? Are they being heard?
Yeah.
What's important to them about this evening? I'm focused on that. It's going to be very difficult for me to have anxiety.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the first thing you described is as a form of self-consciousness. And then we often teach people to first connect to yourself before you connect to others, so that you can die to give to God your false needs, so that you can then be what you described, listening to learn, curious, things like that. Yeah.
And I assume that's, you tell me if you disagree, but I assume that that's what it means to give your anxiety to God. To turn over your anxiety to God, prayer can have a big impact on that, but it's not quite as simple as, hey, please take this away from me. Okay, thank you. At least that hasn't worked for most people who I know of who have simply tried, I'm going to just pray this away. It's, well, what do I need to focus on instead? God, show me what I need to focus on instead. And that's going to be something outside of myself, which means I can then give up the self, which is where that anxiety is coming from.
Yeah, anxiety gets pretty sophisticated because sometimes when you pray, you end up more anxious. You're using a tool to connect to God just to spin more and more. So I'm with you. Sometimes prayer is very helpful and sometimes it doesn't help at all. But I have noticed if I learn to know my triggers, my false needs, then I can go into a situation having done the work. And that's how I survived chaplaincy. I mean, you can't imagine, doing a 28-hour overnight shift. It's 10 p.m. at night. It's already been a really long day. We started at 8 every morning. So I've already done 14 hours. I'm finally sitting down to dinner. And the beeper goes off and I got to leave my dinner and go do another death. I'm like, I can't do it. And so anxiety says, it's all on you. You have to do it's your strength. And I forget the Lord. I think this is why one of the most common commands in the Bible is remember the Lord. I think God knows what it's like to be human. So, on that fourth or fifth death at 10 at night, just taking a couple of minutes to say, what's going on in me right now? Oh, I'm at the end of my rope. Sometimes saying, what would happen is the beeper would go off, someone has died, and I'm so angry that I don't get to finish my meal. Like anxiety distorts reality.
Yeah.
Or this would happen too. I'd be 17 minutes into a Seinfeld episode in the staff break room, and anxiety is saying to me, you have to finish the episode. What? What?
Yeah.
But that's the anxiety puts you in a false reality. So just noticing what's going on in me. Why do I have this false need to finish Seinfeld? Oh, I know why. Because I don't want to walk into a room of death and pain. Like no human wants to walk into that. Okay, Lord, now I have something to die to. So now when I pray, it's much more productive prayer because I'm like, Lord, I am afraid. I am so out of whack right now that I'm afraid of coming back to a cold meal. Like, Lord, I need you because I got to go. I don't have a choice. I have to go. So Lord, as I go, would you help me remember that you're with me? You're already at work in that room. When I enter that room, I'm not doing it under my own strength. I'm relaxing into your presence. Lord, help me to remember that this poor person needs all the time I have to give. So I'm going to trust that you stop me from shortcutting this person so I can get back to my meal, back to my TV. Help me to be fully present to them. That really helped me. I mean, that's how I got through. And I think any leader can do that. I did that as a pastor, where I'm noticing, why am I so spun up? What am I avoiding? What am I afraid of? And then how can I give it to God? It was really a powerful thing.
Yeah, it can absolutely work if the work that you are doing is rooted in something beyond yourself. You know, as a leader of a company, if the only reason you founded this company is so that you could buy a beach house one day, when you are anxious in that work and it's further in its connection to serving God, you know, you're not a chaplain, you're not a pastor, it's harder to make the connection. And you've never thought about that connection. Yeah. And when you're in that moment, the only thing you can really pray for is, hey, please God, take this bad feeling away. And that's not going to work, because God removes that feeling when we focus on him. He doesn't remove it just so we can feel better and then focus more on ourselves. Hey, God, help me focus on myself in a way that feels good instead of focusing on myself in a way that feels bad. Well, that's not dying to myself. So if I do the work early and think of what is it that my business really serves that is beyond me, what is it that my money serves that is beyond me? If we do that enough, and it's not going to be the first answer, but like eventually we're going to get to, well, it has to serve God, right? My business, it's not just serving me, it's serving my family. Well, okay, we're still pretty close to the self, right? Well, it's serving the people who work here. Yeah, okay, that's better, but what is it that your company does? Well, we make widgets. You know, even a widget company, you can connect it to serving God. Well, we make widgets so that people who can't afford the widgets can afford widgets and put their money back to their family and focus on things that are more important in their life. So we're doing God's work by making this product possible. It doesn't have to be that we're selling Bibles.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how to relate to the business leader that isn't mission focused. You know, I only know how to work with people who the customer and the product is the end, you know, is the purpose rather than profit, for example. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. I've tried unsuccessfully to work with people who have that focus and say, and this may be like an example of trying to carry God's burden instead of, trying to do everything myself. Well, these people, they just don't see it. If I can show them that there's something more to focus on outside of themselves, then they'll be good. And it's like, I can't make someone see that who doesn't want to see that. I can't make someone be focused on serving God who doesn't want to do that with their life and their money and their business. It's, that's something that has to happen outside of the work that I'm going to do. But Steve, what's your top decision-making tip for business owners?
It sounds so weird, but my top decision-making tip is to understand that the best thing you have to offer your company is a well self. So before any decision has to be made, am I well? How do I know when I'm not well? What does my life look like when I'm spun up, angry, irritated, irritable? So that's my best tip, is working on being well is the best thing you offer your customers, your team, and yourself. But of course, my work is helping people lower anxiety in the workplace and home place. If you can live a more relaxed, by relaxed I don't mean lazy, I mean you're not reactive, you're connected. Now you're ready to make a decision. That is what gives you the ability to make a decision when you don't actually know what to do. A lot of leaders have to make a decision before they have enough information. And working on yourself is the path. More data, more evidence, more information is not the path, it's the emotional posture. That would be my best tip.
That was very well said. New book coming out into May, The Expectation Gap. Steve, where can people connect with you and the work that you're doing and get a copy of the new book?
Yeah, you can get a copy of the new book anywhere you buy your books, Amazon or Barnes & Noble, all the usual book places. And then the best place to connect with me is my company, which is Capable Life. So capablelife.com. And there's a team of us that help. We do consulting and workshops for, nonprofits and businesses. And we help your team in individual health and relational health. And so that's how you can reach out, and we've got resources on there. We do a workbook, a marketplace workbook that all your team can go through. It's 6 sessions. It's real easy just to help everyone be well. So that's where to find all that.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Steve. I learned a lot and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Sanger. Yep, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
My biggest takeaway is that to give our anxiety over to God, to really, truly get rid of it, we've got to change our perception of what God's going to do to remove it. God is not going to just come down and snatch it up so that we can keep focusing on things that are oriented toward us. It means if we orient ourselves toward God, then we are necessarily no longer focused on ourselves. And if we do that, then our anxieties will leave us. And that's turning it over to God, is saying, I'm actually not going to focus on this. I'm actually not going to concern myself with this. I'm going to focus on His will instead. And if we do that, then we're dying to ourselves. Then we're giving that sacrifice that allows us to be closer to God.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision by subscribing to the show and leaving us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. We appreciate the support. It helps business owners like you find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com, on Instagram at decidedlypodcast, or grab a copy of Sanger and Sean's books from the links in the show notes. Finally, we'd like to thank Shelby Peterson of Transcend Media for editing and post-production of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Morgan, your producer, and this is Decidedly.